to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Originally, there was not a first and a second Kings, it was one book. But in our Bibles, it's divided up. Today, we look at the final chapter of the book of 1 Kings. We'll take a little Kings hiatus, and we'll come back again in a couple of weeks. For 3 years, Syria and Israel continued without war. But in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said to his servants, "Do you know that Ramoth-Gilead belongs to us? And we keep quiet, and do not take it out of the hand of the king of Syria?" And he said to Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to battle at Ramoth-Gilead?" And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses." And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "Inquire first for the word of Yahweh." And then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said to them, "Shall I go to battle against Ramoth-Gilead, or shall I refrain?" And they said, "Go up, for the Lord will give it into the hand of the king." But Jehoshaphat said, "Is there not here another prophet of Yahweh of whom we may inquire?" And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "There is yet one man by whom we may inquire of Yahweh, Micaiah, the son of Imlah. But I hate him, for he never prophesies good concerning me, but evil." And Jehoshaphat said, "Let not the king say so." Then the king of Israel summoned an officer and said, "Bring quickly Micaiah, the son of Imlah." Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, were sitting on their thrones, arrayed in their robes, at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria. And all the prophets were prophesying before them. And Zedekiah, the son of Kenana, made for himself horns of iron, and said, "Thus says Yahweh, with these you shall push the Syrians until they are destroyed." And all the prophets prophesied so, and said, "Go up to Ramoth-Gilead and triumph. Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king." And the messenger who went to summon Micaiah said to him, "Behold, the words of the prophets with one accord are favorable to the king. Let your word be like the word of one of them, and speak favorably." But Micaiah said, "As Yahweh lives, what Yahweh says to me, that I will speak." And when he had come to the king, and the king said to him, "Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain?" And he answered him, "Go up and triumph. Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king." But the king said to him, "How many times shall I make you swear that you shall speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh?" And he said, "I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. And Yahweh said, These have no master. Let each return to his home in peace." And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil?" And Micaiah said, "Therefore hear the word of Yahweh. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. And Yahweh said, Who will entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead?" And one said one thing, another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before Yahweh, saying, "I will entice him." And Yahweh said to him, "By what means?" And he said, "I will go out, and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets." And he said, "You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now therefore, behold, Yahweh has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets. Yahweh has declared disaster for you." And then Zedekiah the son of Kenana came near and struck Micaiah on the cheek, and said, "How did the Spirit of Yahweh go from me to speak to you?" And Micaiah said, "Behold, you shall see on that day, when you go into an inner chamber to hide yourself." The king of Israel said, "Seize Micaiah, and take him back to Ammon the governor of the city, and to Joash the king's son. And say, Thus says the king, Put this fellow in prison, and feed him meager rations of bread and water, until I come in peace." And Micaiah said, "If you return in peace, Yahweh has not spoken by me." And he said, "Hear, all you peoples." So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah went up to Ramoth-Gilead. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "I will disguise myself and go into battle. but you wear your robes." And the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. Now the king of Syria had commanded the 32 captains of his chariots, "Fight with neither small nor great, but only with the king of Israel." When the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, "It is surely the king of Israel." So they turned to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out. When the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. But a certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate. Therefore he said to the driver of his chariot, "Turn around and carry me out of the battle, for I am wounded." And the battle continued that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot facing the Syrians until at evening he died. And the blood of the wound flowed into the bottom of the chariot, and about sunset a cry went out throughout the army, "Every man to his city, and every man to his country." So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. They washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood, and the prostitutes washed themselves in it, according to the word of Yahweh that he had spoken. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did, the ivory house that he built and all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son reigned in his place. Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, began to reign over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. He walked in all the way of Asa his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of Yahweh. Yet the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, and his might that he showed, and how he warred, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And from the land he exterminated the remnant of the male cult prostitutes who remained in the days of his father Asa. There was no king in Edom, a deputy was king. Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir for gold, but they did not go, for the ships were wrecked at Ezion-Geber. Then Ahaziah the son of Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, "Let my servants go with your servants in the ships." But Jehoshaphat was not willing. And Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father, and Jehoram his son reigned in his place. Ahaziah the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel and Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. He did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and walked in the way of his father, and in the way of his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. He served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger in every way that his father had done. This is the word of the Lord. As we look at our text today, wrapping up the book of 1 Kings, we have a period of peace after those previous 2 conflicts between Ben-Hadad of Syria and Ahab of Israel, which you can read about in chapter 20. But they go for more than 2 years without war against each other, with a season of peace. And then we get Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. This is not the first time we've heard his name. He appears in 1 Kings chapter 15, where we will learn that he is the son of Asa, and he'll begin to reign when Asa dies, which is recorded again in that chapter 15. But we get more of Jehoshaphat's reign at the end of this chapter. We actually learn more about him throughout the chapter than we do at the end. But we'll keep our eyes on both. He comes down to the king of Israel in Samaria. Now, on a map, you'd be actually going up, but it's elevation down, coming from Jerusalem down to Samaria. And at this time, Ahab, the king of Israel, asks his servants about one of the cities, Ramoth-Gilead, which was a city of the Jews. It was part of the territory of the Promised Land for the people of Israel. It's supposed to be theirs. In fact, in his language, it is theirs, but they have been keeping quiet as Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, kept it for himself. If you might remember, back in chapter 20, when Ahab spared Ben-Hadad's life. He shouldn't have. Ben-Hadad had promised to restore the cities that his father had taken from Ahab's father, and this would appear to be one of those cities unreturned. So Ahab brings up the conversation and then encourages Jehoshaphat to join him in battle. Israel and Judah fighting together. Jehoshaphat's response is interesting. He says, I am as you are. Ask your children what that means. What does it mean that Jehoshaphat is the same as Ahab? What do we know about Ahab? Ahab is a wicked man who does not trust in God. He worships Baal and some of the other pagan gods as well, and he has led his people to sin. Which part of that do you want to be a part of? And yet Jehoshaphat says, I am as you are. Perhaps it's a reference to a mutual state of enmity with Syria, a common enemy. Most likely it has a connection to 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 18, where we learn that Jehoshaphat's son Jehoram has married Ahab's daughter Athaliah, and this forms a political alliance and thus also a military alliance between the two. Now, if we take a step backwards, I am as you are. I am as you ought to be would actually be a better statement. But they are both the nations of God, right? Israel, the northern kingdom, Judah, the southern kingdom. These are all God's people. They are to follow Yahweh and to follow him alone. Now again, the northern kingdom has been doing terribly at that already, and Judah hasn't done very well at it herself. But that's the mutual connection that they have, is Yahweh. And if they were trusting in Yahweh, this would not be an issue. This chapter would not need to have been written. It wouldn't have happened. Jehoshaphat seems to have said this, I am as you are, as a way of linking himself together with Ahab. My people is your people, my horses is your horses. Take us, use us as you need us. In the sense of alliance, that's good. Faithfulness before the Lord, maybe not as much. Jehoshaphat, though, takes a step back, and he says, inquire first for the word of Yahweh. This is good. Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, wants to know, is Yahweh on our side? Is this a war that he supports? If we have his favor, this is good. If we don't, this is bad. So the king of Israel gathers the prophets. We learn there's 400 of them, roughly. And they prophesy, go up. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. Jehoshaphat seems to notice something amiss. Something doesn't seem right about these 400 prophets. So he presses Ahab a little further. Isn't there yet one man by whom we may inquire of Yahweh? Is there not here another? So, something, again, off about this. It doesn't seem like a right response. So, we get the response of Ahab. There is one more. His name is Micaiah. But I hate him. He never prophesies good concerning me, but evil. Jehoshaphat's response, let not the king say so, is not about what Micaiah says. It's about Ahab's statement, I hate him. Let not the king say so. Do not despise the prophet that Yahweh sends to you. That's wise. It's a good word. Now they're sitting on their thrones together, right? As we might imagine, I guess, the throne of Jehoshaphat having been carried there from Jerusalem for him to sit on. And all the prophets continue to prophesy before them the same thing. Thus says Yahweh, with these you shall push the Syrians until they are destroyed. Horns of iron that Zedekiah has made. So they continue to prophesy favorably for Ahab. One contextual thing to bring in perhaps is Deuteronomy chapter 18, where we actually learn that false prophecy, you know it's false prophecy if they say that it comes from the Lord, but it doesn't come true. If they make a fulfillment prophecy, if they make a prophecy of something happening in the future, but it doesn't happen, they are a false prophet by the very definition. The word did not come from Yahweh. And so here, Zedekiah is a false prophet. Thus says Yahweh when Yahweh has not said thus. The penalty for these false prophets would be death. That's Deuteronomy chapter 18, where you'll find that. I think you can read maybe verses 20 to 22 there to get the context. Now, in fairness, we're going to learn from Micaiah in just a moment here that the deception actually comes from the Lord himself. That the Lord has caused this false prophesying to happen before Ahab, because Ahab, again, is not faithful. God is bringing about his judgment on Ahab in these events that are to come. The messenger goes and has the audacity, he has the nerve to instruct Micaiah what to say, to tell the prophet of Yahweh what to speak to the king. Let your word be like the word of one of them, and speak favorably. Micaiah rightly says otherwise. What Yahweh says to me, that I will speak. That's the prophet's job, is to speak whatever God says to God's people. That's why he has called them into that position. So Micaiah comes, Ahab asks, and Micaiah, you got to picture this one as sarcasm, I think. Go up in triumph, Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king. Very similar to what the 400 prophets have said. The reason I say you should take it as sarcasm is because King Ahab realizes something is amiss. How many times shall I make you swear that you speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh? Ahab knows that what Micaiah just said was not true. So sarcasm, a sarcastic tone would explain that. Ahab's general distrust and dislike for Micaiah might play into it, but that's the reality. And it's a very interesting response there from Ahab in verse 16. How many times shall I make you swear that you speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh? Legitimately, how many times? How often has this happened? How often has Micaiah come before Ahab and sarcastically or with not a noticeable tone told the king whatever his itching ears wanted to hear rather than the direct word of Yahweh? Is this a regular practice between the two? Is that why Ahab can so easily pick up on the idea that Micaiah is not speaking truthfully? I don't know. We don't get more than what we have here. So Micaiah finally does. He speaks the truth. He speaks the word that Yahweh has given him to speak. Starting in verse 17, Israel scattered on the mountains. It's a mountainous region. There's mountains all over the place, hills everywhere. Sheep that have no shepherd. The shepherd is the leader of the sheep. Ahab, as king over Israel, is the leader of the people. The prophecy is that Ahab will be no more. He will no longer be the leader of this people, which is a reference, as Ahab himself would have taken it, a reference most likely to the idea of death. So Ahab looks to Jehoshaphat. Did I not tell you? Told you so. Told you he would only speak evil of me. But Micaiah continues. He paints the picture of the heavenly throne room of Yahweh himself, and the angels, the heavenly host, gathered around him, and Yahweh asking which one of those angels will carry out his bidding of judgment against Ahab, who will entice him to go off into battle and lose his life there in that place. One of them agrees to do it and goes and convinces the 400 prophets, entices them in order that they would speak falsely to the king. Now, don't excuse them, because what What you see next shows their own wickedness. So even though this comes from the Lord, it is his judgment. The prophets themselves are still wicked, and we'll see that in just a second. Before we do, here's a question that you could ask your children. This is a good stopping point in the chapter. What should they have done? What should Ahab have done? What should Jehoshaphat have done? If you were in this position, what should you have done? The goal would be to trust in Yahweh, to trust in the true prophet of the king, of the Lord, spoken to the king, and don't go. Turn back. Jehoshaphat should have gone home, but they don't. Instead, Zedekiah the prophet strikes him. They seize him, they put him in prison, and Ahab commands he stay in prison until Ahab returns safely. Micaiah simply responds, and greatly responds, "If you return in peace, Yahweh has not spoken by me." That will deem Micaiah to be a false prophet, the penalty of which, again, Deuteronomy 18, ought to be death. Micaiah is aware. All right, we got to fly through the rest of the section here. So Jehoshaphat and Ahab go into battle. Ahab hides. He disguises himself so that he knew there would be a target on him, and he gets away from that target, thinking he can outwit Yahweh, perhaps. I don't know, but he's struck down anyway. A certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel. So Ahab dies in battle. Every man to his city, they scatter just as sheep do without a shepherd, as Micaiah said. The king's life ends in disgrace as he bleeds in the chariot. The chariot is washed in the pool of Samaria, the dogs licking up the blood from that. And then the prostitutes, this adds to the disgrace. The prostitutes end up using his blood mixed in with the water. They're not just bathing in blood, but they bathe in that water that is his blood. And that's just, again, adding to the shame because they are unclean themselves. Ahaziah takes over, reigns in his place. We'll go ahead and skip to that. That's the end of the chapter, starting in verse 51. Ahaziah, in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, so about 853 BC perhaps. He's only going to reign 2 years. He does what is evil in Yahweh's sight, walking in his dad's ways and mom's ways, so Jezebel, and then also Jeroboam, that keeps coming up with these kings of Israel. The sins of Jeroboam keep returning. Jehoshaphat reigned in Judah in 871 BC for 25 years. He walked faithfully in the way of his father Asa, did what was right in the sight of Yahweh, yet couple problems. High places are not taken away. The people don't stop the worship of these false gods on those high places. But he does make peace with the king of Israel, which is new. That's the first time since the kingdom split that the nations have been at peace. And he finishes purging the male cult prostitutes from the land. He does try to make ships to seek out prosperity from Ophir, like Solomon did a few generations before, but fails as the ships do not make the journey. Jehoram will replace him. So if you're keeping track, if you're keeping count of the kings of Israel and Judah, we are at 0 good kings over Israel, with 8 evil kings. And in Judah, it's a 50-50. We've got 2 good and 2 evil to this point.